I'm Isabel Matheson, the Director of Communications at ODI, and I'm really delighted to be chairing this session at the Cape Conference. In the previous session, we heard just at the end there some really telling experiences of country-level instances of aid effectiveness or indeed aid ineffectiveness in some cases. And in this session, we're really going to look at what that country experience looks like. First of all, through the lens of the two speakers that I have with me. Heng Chu, on my right, he is the Director of Policy and Aid Coordination at the Council for Development in Cambodia. And Yvonne Kwanzaa is the Director of External Resource Mobilization in the Ministry of Finance in Ghana. We at ODI, of course, have a major program of research on this, and you'll hear from a moment from our key researcher, Annalisa Prison, on this. But first, I want to also stress that this will be an interactive session after we've heard our two speakers, and we're going to be using a piece of technology which I know that you've been introduced to at the beginning. It's called Pigeonhole. So on your laptops and smartphones, you can log in to Pigeonhole at www.pigeonholelive.at. The password is 2016 Cape. And you can submit a question. It's got a 140 character limit, just like Twitter. And there's a chance for us to kind of audience source the most popular questions. It's our first time using this. It's my first time, so don't let me down, guys. Please ask a few questions. And we'll see where we go from there. But the idea here is really to get your thoughts and experience as well, because I know we've got delegates from all over the world, so that would be great to hear from you. So first of all, if we could just hear from Annalisa Prison, who is our key researcher on this, who led our project, The Age of Choice.
Thank you very much, Isabel. So, debating on whether and how the principles of development effectiveness are still fit for purpose 10 years after the Paris Declaration was adopted will be our main task for the next couple of days. A development finance landscape that has remarkably changed over the past 10 years is hardly a novelty for anyone in the room and online. What is less known, however, is what this all means for developing countries' governments. We heard that before this morning. A development effectiveness agenda for the SDG era must be grounded in the experiences and objectives of those seeking to develop and support. You will be listening directly from Heng and Yvonne in a few minutes. They will share the perspective of their own governments with us. I will offer instead what other developing country governments see as their priorities for the development effectiveness agenda, focusing on three dimensions. First, which principles of development effectiveness are still relevant for developing country governments? Second, which principles have fallen off their radar and we should reassess? This might be surprising and slightly disturbing to some of you that have been working on these agendas for quite some time. Finally, there are preferences developing countries' governments have expressed about the way development assistance should be delivered, but they don't feature at the moment in the development effectiveness agenda. How have we informed this evidence? At ODI, we traveled to Africa, Asia, and the Pacific over the last 4 years. We interviewed more than 150 government officials in 13 countries, including we've been to Phnom Penh and Accra. We asked them about how development assistance should be delivered. The strapline for this project was an age of choice for development finance, simply because, again, no novelty, developing countries' governments have many more financing options than ever before to support their national development strategies. Also, colleagues at the Australian National University conducted a survey involving 40 low and middle-income countries along similar lines. And the conference note that you have in your conference package does reflect this evidence as well. Let me start now by highlighting the two principles of development effectiveness that are still relevant for developing country governments. First of all, ownership of development programs. Ownership was expressed as a key priority in most countries, with reduced conditionality considered as an important way to achieve this. Second, alignment to national priorities, fit with national strategies. No projects to be accepted unless they're included in a national strategy. Second point, what about those principles of development effectiveness that have fallen off the radar of developing countries' governments and we should reassess? We heard before there might be several reasons for this, including lack of priority, or even these principles are too difficult to be achieved. I'm not saying we should drop them. I'll focus on 4 of them. First, harmonization, which was rarely mentioned in interviews with senior government officials. In most countries, governments did not express strong interest in leading the country coordination mechanisms, with a general fatigue perceived around them, even in those countries that were particularly active at the time of the Paris Declaration, Accra, and Busan agendas. Governments seem to prefer bilateral dialogue instead, despite the pressure on government systems. Second, result agenda. Again, rarely mentioned and of low priority. Third, transparency. Government officials are certainly keen to have timely and reliable information on development assistance, both from public and private sources to inform their own decisions. But making this information public was not necessarily a priority. Fourth, we talked about this earlier on, views on untied aid were rarely given by interviewees unless prompted, and even in these cases, views were mixed. On the one hand, there were concerns about the lack of knowledge sharing and capacity building, but tied aid was also seen as a way to reduce administrative cost and have projects deliver faster. Let me go now to the third point. Which preferences developing countries' governments have about the way development assistance should be delivered, but they don't still feature in the development effectiveness agenda? First, speed of contract negotiations and project implementation. It was expressed as a key priority. We call it speed of delivery in the Age of Choice report. Speed was considered of such high priority in some countries that interviewees gave examples of concessional loans being rejected in favor of less concessional financing, for example from China, because of the lengthy process and policy conditionality. Second, capacity building. Government officials, especially those in the Pacific countries that we analyzed, highly value capacity building embedded within projects, and often use this as a criterion for selecting a new project. So what should ministers gathering in Nairobi take from this evidence that I've just briefly outlined? First, 2 principles are of high priority for developing countries' governments and should feature as primary objectives of the development effectiveness agenda. These are ownership of development programs and alignment to national priority. Second, there's a clear scope for developing country governments to review the effectiveness of country coordination mechanisms. If there is a positive answer, so development partners should commit to supporting national development effectiveness secretariats, either financially or with technical assistance. Finally, 2 principles and indicators should feature in the new development effectiveness agenda. First, expand an earlier indicator included in the Paris Declaration for demand-driven and cost-effective technical assistance. This could be measured by the share of projects that have a capacity-building component with a long-term target of 100%. Second, commit to reducing the length of project cycles by identifying areas where processes can be streamlined while ensuring environmental and social safeguards are in place. And this would apply to both development partners and developing country governments alike. This could be assessed by the average time to first disbursement, with a target to reduce this indicator over time. So I kind of offer some reflections and propositions based on ODI research on which principles of development effectiveness should stay in the agenda, which ones should be reassessed, and which ones should be included. But a development effectiveness agenda, to be successful and to be truly effective, has to be grounded in the views and perspectives of those it seeks to support. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Thank you for your outline of the research, the key findings, and also your propositions. Maybe we can get some responses on Pigeonhole to some of those ideas that you had. Turning first to Yvonne Kwanzaa from the Ministry of Finance in Ghana. Yvonne, just thinking about how this looks from your perspective, maybe just give us a bit of a picture of what has changed in terms of development finance in the last 10 years for Ghana.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also like to thank ODI for inviting me to be here to present the Ghana perspective of the changing development finance landscape. For Ghana, I would say that the aspirations of economic growth, development, and prosperity to ensure that we consolidate our middle income status, and then also the specific challenges of financing infrastructure in a more sustainable way, and the achievement of the SDGs that require massive financing and effectiveness are in recent times, are the driving policies, financing policy initiatives for us. So for us, the age of choice study that was conducted for us, we say is more timely, where you have new players that are supporting your development priorities. I also agree with the research that apart from these new players, we need to have better understanding of the way they work, the different financing options they use, and who is also available for us to source this financing. So for Ghana, what is our landscape for now? We continue to use multilateral and bilateral development cooperation modalities. We still receive grant financing, we receive concessional, we receive non-concessional, we have the vertical funds, we have the technical cooperation. But aside that, we also have the new players. We have the commercial banks, we have the BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China. And then also, we have also accessed the capital market. And then we are also using PPP. We are considering using PPP as for huge infrastructure projects. But then, external financing continues to be the largest source of financing, which is over 60% as compared to our domestic financing. And interestingly, ODA still contributes to be the largest that we have, and the rest is the commercial and the international sovereign bond. But then what is happening with the ODA flows is that because we are now middle income, there is that gradual shift from grants to concessional loans. And then you have other countries that are also providing export credit, etc. So another one is beyond ODA flows, what is happening? Yes, we agree China is the largest, and as I said, we have Brazil, we have India, we have South Africa. An international bond is the second largest of our beyond ODA flows. Climate finance and philanthropic financing are very small. We also have PPPs. We now have a PPP policy. We have a PPP bill yet to be passed into law. But so far, we've not had any serious PPP arrangement. It's only just few management and operational contracts. So the question is that if we say we are in the age of choice, what is driving Ghana's age of choice? We have one main principle that is shaping that, and what we are saying is that we need an improved and sustainable debt and fiscal management strategy so that will guide our gross financing requirements and to also mitigate risks identified in our debt portfolio. So for Ghana now, we have a new PFM law that includes debt management, etc. In terms of the priorities that we are thinking of for Nairobi, volume of finance is still important for us. Because when you look at what we have, the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 2, it includes infrastructure needs. And we know ODA, traditional ODA is not sufficient for that. So we need funding from. So for volume, yes, we are. In terms of ownership, I think a lot has been said about ownership. For us, ownership is still very important because we know that ownership is the best strategy to guarantee that development programs succeed and expand in the long term. And especially when we have the SDGs, and we are encouraging that development partners to ensure that they tie in their support with add SDGs. Alignment. Yes, alignment is still important for us because we are seeing that strategies and use of country systems such as budget support is very important. I think in the early 2000s, we had a lot of budget support, but now I should say that we have only 3 development partners in giving budget support. So with that, what do we have to do? We have to resort to increasing our domestic revenue, looking at the international bond market and other sources to give cash to support our budget. Untied aid is very important. Speed of delivery, yes, is still important for us because of delays. And when we look at our development agenda, we look at our plans, we need to. Another area too that has come up is the diversification of funding sources and the instrument, which is very important. For us, during the HIPIC, we saw wealth creation as a way of reducing poverty. So what do we have to do now as a middle-income country? We agree that with middle-income country, aid is going to shrink, and we are going to get less grants, less concessional loans, and we move to hybrid and market terms. So for us, in the age of choice, what we have done is, yes, we are still using our multilaterals, we are still using our bilaterals, we are still using international capital market. In fact, recently we were even in the market again so that we support our development agenda. But then you realize that because of our strategy of debt sustainability and debt strategy and making sure that we have a good fiscal strategy that can be sustained, so it drives that. So we need more financing, but we don't overborrow.
Okay, so
yes.
If we just stop there, I know there's a lot more to say, but I want to give people a chance to chip in and ask you questions as well.
Then.
And actually great to see so many questions coming through, so keep them coming. I'm going to turn now to Handshake. How much of what Yvonne has been saying sounds very familiar to you and your situation in Cambodia?
Thank you.
I think it's on, yeah.
Cambodia was included in the studies conducted by ODI in 2012 on the changing aid landscape. And I think that was a very good study that shows a lot of information on the actual landscape in Cambodia. So in the last 5 years, Cambodia received around 1.3, on average, around 1.3 billion US dollar in aid a year. And that represented an increase of around 10% year on year. And for example, in 2013, the actual amount of ODA aid Cambodia received was close to 1.5 billion, of which China comprised 28% of the total amount. The Asian Development Bank took 11%. Japan provided around 10 to 12%, while the EU member states combined comprise around 10%. The UN agencies also is among the big players in Cambodia, taking around 7%. The rest was provided by non-state actors, non-governmental organizations. That was about 4 or 15%. So grants, during the last 5 years, grants were relatively unchanged. The increase was driven mainly by the surge in concessional loan. And for the first time in 2013, concessional loan was for the first time bigger than grants. So we expect this trend to continue for years from now. So if we look at geographically at donors, so right now the amount of aid provided by partners from the Asia-Pacific regions, for example, China, the Asian Development Bank, Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, comprised almost 60% of the total amount of aid Cambodia receives every year. While the EU countries stands at around 10%, the UN 7%, and the rest provided by non-state actors. This picture was completely different before 2010. So most of ODA was provided by multilateral institutions and European countries and the EU. So
given that changing landscape, how relevant are the aid effectiveness principles that were set out before 2010?
So I think with aid landscape changing, I think this has presented the royal government of Cambodia with both challenges and opportunities. So challenges in terms of a lot of partners. So there's a risk of fragmentation and dilution of support. So this is already happening. So we still struggling to get information on what's going on the ground. And also with coordination issues. So too many players and there is growing antipathy towards coordination. But this is also an opportunity given the growing needs for finance and the challenges, development challenges that Cambodia is facing right now as it is moving from one stage of development to another. So the government has been working to promote inclusive partnership, working with all development stakeholders and devising new and innovative approaches so that we can ensure more effective use of the available resources to support development of Cambodia. So I stop right now before
just quickly on this point of how relevant are the existing principles for you, and actually what do you want to see come out of Nairobi? Just quickly on those points.
Okay. So thank you. I think Cambodia strongly supports the 2030 agenda and sees in the SDG an opportunity to frame national development priorities at a time when we are transitioning towards a low middle income country status. So just to give you a brief overview, over the last 15 years, there's been considerable socio-economic progress in Cambodia. So allow me to highlight a few.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah. So as a country, we are a relatively new and young democracy. So civil war ended only in the late 1990s, and democracy was introduced with the support of the UN. But since then, we have maintained peace, stability, and promote democracy. The economy grew during the last 15 years at an average of 7.7% a year. So that has resulted in drastic decline in the rate of poverty, which was more than 50% at the start of the year 2000. So in 2014, it stood at around 16%. And other improvements in social indicators such as primary enrollment, child and mother mortality rate, and the prevention of HIV/AIDS. So development cooperation has been a major source of finance. And as Cambodia consolidates its progress over the last 15 years and moves on to address new challenges, so ensuring the effective use of those resources is very important.
So what would you like to see come out of Nairobi?
Cambodia understands that addressing these challenges require stronger ownership, new and innovative approaches to development, and more and effective resources. So I think the development effectiveness agenda clearly recognizes that ODA is just one among many other kinds of resources that are available to support partner countries, and there is a need to include every stakeholder in the development process. While it is important to ensure effective use of ODA resources, which means that the Busan principles continue to be relevant, it is also important that development effectiveness principles need to respond to partner countries' realities and support partner countries to have the ability to cope with their development challenge. So here, let me stress 5 things Cambodia sees.
Very quickly.
Yeah, very important.
So I can
First,
bring in people around the room.
the need to strengthen national public finance and support domestic revenue mobilization efforts. Second, support to the private sector and leverage other flows of resources. Third, continue support for countries like Cambodia who just graduated towards low middle income countries. Fourth, increase support to climate change, to address climate change issues and other environment-related vulnerabilities. And finally, we need to continue to deliver on the development effectiveness commitments as outlined in the Busan Declaration. So this is very important.
And that sounds like a really great summary to end this bit of it, the session on. And thank you very much. And sorry for rushing you through your speech. I did want to give us a bit of a chance to bring in others. So I'm going to turn to Pigeonhole. And I am going to try and use the iPad. Who knows if it'll work. So the highest number of people wanting an answer to this question and reflections is global rhetoric about development effectiveness translated into action by in-country donor staff? If not, what action can partner countries take to change this? And maybe I can just have a few quick thoughts from Yvonne and Heng on this, but also what I'd really like to hear is any thoughts from people in the audience and perhaps some of those who supported or asked the question could give us their thoughts as well. So feel free to put your hands up once Yvonne and Heng have had a quick chance to think about that. So what do you think, Yvonne? Global rhetoric translated into action by in-country donor staff? If not, what can be done about it? What's your experience in Ghana, do you think?
If not, what action can partner countries change? I think that one issue is about the harmonization. When it comes to issue of the volumes, the question is that why did we start looking at the new players? We noticed that traditional donors are given smaller amounts. We have huge infrastructure needs. And trying to get traditional donors to harmonize their procedures, their processes, their systems, so that we can do co-financing arrangement to support most of this huge infrastructure projects were missing. So it realized that it triggered us looking at new players who are ready to give us large amounts of funds to implement some of these projects. So what we want changes, let's see how we will harmonize our disbursement processes, our procurement processes, the financial management processes, etc., so that we can do massive co-financing arrangement to support some of our infrastructure.
So are you kind of answering this by saying that if you don't like what the traditional donors are offering, you've got a lot more choice now, you can go other places?
No, not that. When you look at my presentation, I said we are using all players. That is why we are still encouraging our traditional donors to be part of it, because when you look at overall debt sustainability, we still need our traditional donors. So I wouldn't say we want to force them, but we want to still encourage them to support some of these key infrastructure projects. They are part of it, and they should support us for debt sustainability purposes. And we've been with them throughout. We've done it in the past, and we can continue with them. So we should look at it.
Heng, how do you answer this question?
I think straight to the point, there's not enough change when it comes to donor to the country level. So this has been a challenge for partner countries. So good rhetoric, commitments at the global level, but actually happening on the ground. So business as usual.
So give us an example of that.
So for example, we have committed to providing information on a 3-year basis or 5-year basis on aid that is forthcoming. But I think it has taken a lot of time for our partners to start to provide information on this. So take the issue of alignment. So we have seen progress in terms of policy alignment, but alignment with system alignment, like the use of country system, is very slow. So that's.
Can I just ask any reflections from you in the audience? Perhaps people who've had similar experiences like Hen and Yvonne were talking about. Anybody like to share some of that? Simon?